Okay, round 3. Didn't have audio on the last upload, so we're going to start over. What I want to talk about today is getting our object from 3ds Max into Substance fairly effectively. I've already got a scene built, and we've already had this set up. I'll go ahead and use it. Start with Substance, create one, here, isolate. Okay, so what I got in here so far, I've got a low poly box. Let's open this up. And a high poly box. The high poly box right now I have a push modifier, and I'll go over that in a little bit. I have an example in another scene. But basically what I've done is I just created a box and I set the UVs. And when I built the UVs originally, I wanted to flatten them all out such as this, but since I've applied a material to each and every face, named accordingly, so I should go here to the sub-object material. I've got the rubber rhino, I've got wood oak, I've got metal rust, plastic coated, metal 01, and metal painted. These are just generic names that I'm using just so I know what kind of materials I'm going to put on each object. What I wanted to make sure that we understand is since each one of those has a different material, they're all going to have their different UV and a different layer inside of Substance Painter. So as an example, what I'll do is go ahead and export this out. So this collapses down. I want to export each model independently. So let's go ahead and select that object. I'm going to collapse to, and I'll go over the push here in a little bit. Start with the low poly, select it. I'm going to copy that name. Let's go ahead and call this crate low poly actually. So I'm going to select all that, hit Control C, go to File, Export, Export Selected, and I go into here. I'm going to place that in there. It's basically overwriting this object right now, but that's okay. Hit OK. Now these are the settings that I downloaded from the interwebs. I've done multiple things to kind of get the same solution, but what we want to do is we want to go ahead and have smoothing groups, tangents, to binormals, triangulate, and preserve edge orientation. So we'll turn off Turbo Smooth and turn on Triangulate. From that point on, I can hit OK at this point because there's not much else I have to worry about. Now the high poly mesh, when I come in here, we'll select it. I want to export it as well. So again, I'll go ahead and hit copy and export. Select it. Same exact settings. It's right there, so I'm just going to go ahead and overwrite it. Same exact settings. Hit OK. Awesome. Those guys are ready to go. Now, the things to keep in mind is that I need the materials to be on the low poly model, not the high poly. And I don't really need to worry about the high poly in terms of how it's painted, because all I care about is the quality of geometry. What I'm looking for is that smooth corner right there, so it doesn't look like it's an actual CG element, but an actual box made by man, put into a world that we've built. So let's minimize that real quick. Close you. Open up Substance. So here's Substance Painter. We'll have a 3D side and a texture side, and this is our shelf where all our cool toys are. I'm not going to worry about it too much. Let's just go into the actual import setups. So we go to New. What we want to do is we want to use, in terms of the template, since we're going to be using a game engine and we're using Unity, let's go ahead and use Unity 5 algorithmic. Not worried about these checkboxes, they're fine. It's procedural, so we can leave it at 2048 and we can always up or lower the resolution while in project. It's a wonderful little thing, but we're fine with it right now. Select the model. So we go in here, create low poly 01. Everything else is ready to go, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. All right, so it moves just like a game engine. So if I hold right click and Alt to scale, holding Alt and left click to arc rotate or rotate the camera. A couple things I want you to see is that first off, I get those sharp corners on my object, and this object is not ready for painting yet. What we got to do is bake the material maps. And so I'll go into here to where we have texture set settings, and we'll go ahead and bake the mesh maps. In here is where we'll get the high poly object. So let's start with that. Go to Common, go right here, high poly parameters. We'll just hit that. Go to our high poly crate. apply it. So that's where our smooth edges will go, from the sharp corners to a nice rounded edge. And now with the IDs, let's go ahead and change that to material color so that it will match what we've got from 3ds Max. Do a hue shift. We want to make sure that we apply to all, otherwise we'll just apply to the one layer that we have, and since we made 6 layers, we want to get all of them set up. So now we can go ahead and hit Bake Texture Sets. Now, a couple things to keep in mind. What I have not done, I have not actually set up my smoothing groups for my object, and I'll show you what the mistake is, and what we'll do is we'll update it, as well as update the UVs. The key thing to keep in mind is that since I'm going to have a layer for each one of my objects, each one of my faces, I can actually build out my UVs to where they take up the whole space. As soon as we're done with that, we'll go ahead and show you, but I want to go ahead and let this bake out so we can see what will happen. I think it would be cool. What they could do is, like, while they're doing this little slider, show an image of a dude sitting in front of his computer and just have cobwebs slowly appear as the build-up gets more and more complete. Where it hits 100%, he's completely covered.
It's just a skeleton.
It's just a skeleton, completely covered in spider webs, yeah.
It's the day before you.
But it's going to be beautiful when it's done. You can already see some of the edging coming in. So the normal maps are coming in, and it's already looking chunky. And the reason why it's chunky is because each one of my faces has its own smoothing group, and that's not what we want. We want to smooth that out. So that's one of the issues we have. All right, so here we go. We've got all the different textures that we have created. Now, these are mostly for substance. The normal and world space normals we could actually use. IDs coming from us, from 3ds Max. Ambient occlusion we'll use, but there's not much in here because it's a pretty convex shape. Curvature is talking about, I think, the angles of the smoothing groups, but I'm not quite sure. Position is where objects are, so if we have a multi-object thing, such as a sword or a car or a wheel, it'll show which one is positioned in Z space. Thickness is basically how thick the actual map and how the for the mesh is. We'll go into more detail about that as I do some research. But for the most part, right now we're pretty ready to go. All right, so getting to the point of my UV space. So here's my UVs for Metal 01, and then here's Metal Painted, and here's Metal Rust. So what I'm seeing here is a waste of UV space, because each one of my things is a single plane, and I have all this texture space that I'm not utilizing. So I want to fix my normals and my smoothing groups, which will fix my normals, excuse me, and I want to fix my UV. So we go back into 3ds Max and do a quick little change out. So first things first, we are done with the high poly. The high poly mesh is amazing, it's gorgeous, whatever, we're moving on. Selecting the entire mesh, I'll go into the smoothing groups. I can clear all if I want, or I can always go ahead and just hit 180. Now it's going to render pretty ugly in 3ds Max, but that's okay. Next, I'm going to go to the Unwrap tool, and I'm going to basically scale up each one of my faces to where they occupy as much of the actual UV space as possible. I bet you anything, a nickel to a dime, there's probably an easy button for this, and I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to go do it the manual way, but it's real simple. I'm just going to kind of just...
You hold shift before you put the...
I'm holding control right now because it'll maintain the actual proportion. So when I scale, it'll scale in proportion. If I hold shift, it'll stay on an axis. So this is shift.
Oh, I see.
And if I do that, if I hold control,
Okay.
it keeps the proportions. And that's important because when I did the flattened mapping originally to get the mapping set up, that's where the proportions got established, and I want to make sure that they keep from the 3D space to the texture space. So what we're going to do now is that we have to re-export a low poly mesh with the new smoothing groups and the new UVs. Hit collapse, edit poly, export selected. Always use export selected. Don't want to export the entire scene. Overwrite in the same file. Hit yes. Everything's the same. Beautiful. Go to substance. Awesome. Now we want to Keep an eye on that corner right there. Go to project configuration inside edit. Come into the select tool, grab the new low poly mesh. Everything's the same. And let it process. Okay, so the normals gotta get rebuilt. So I gotta actually rebuild the whole project. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Forgot about that. Sorry, I apologize for that. So we'll select,
Why do you have to reset the project?
because it's using the original normals. Well, let me see. Maybe I just have to rebake it. Let's see. If I go into normal, I can actually rebake just what I want. So if I bake mesh maps, I can uncheck everything. Go to normal, which is common here. That has the high poly still. So I'm gonna bake normal mesh maps. Oopsie, cancel that. Hit the wrong button. Bake mesh maps. I have just a normal on there. I'm gonna bake all the textures. And let's see if that actually works. I may not have to re-import it.
So this is where I'm getting tied up, trying to make the high quality frame.
This is why so this is why we want the high poly to fit inside the low poly,
Got that.
so that we get that beautiful, that corner has now just changed to something absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, mine's
Right.
still pretty like.
Okay,
When I
so
was mine, I had like it was like almost a line, but it like was like it was inside the faces.
okay, so it's kind of squished in a little bit, maybe. Let me get in here. Let me just get this one example here real quick, and I'll show you why I want to actually say use the when you want to shrink your mesh to not use different software. All right, so this is my high poly mesh. All I did was add a chamfer to my low poly mesh. Now it's not effective, and that's gross, and it's going to make very bad projections. But the point I want to make is this: I don't want to scale my object to fit inside my low poly. I don't want to have this parallax right here. That's not going to give me a good projection. The low poly has to capture all the details from the high poly. And if I use scale, it's just going to create some nasty overlaps, which is not going to be effective. So I use the push modifier, which is found in the parametrics modifiers. And that actually will scale or push the geometry based on the directions of the normals. I just need a little bit. -1 is all I need, but just to kind of give you an idea of what it does. The push modifier is one of my favorite modifiers in the software. And that's how I'd export the high poly mesh. Just want to show that. Okay, stop.